Today, we'll be talking about rational number conversions, and our content objective is students will be able to convert between rational numbers and percents, and you should notice in your notes that there is a blank spot for that verb. Our language objective, which is where our discussions head towards, is you'll be able to read decimal and fraction and percent answers correctly. And then one of the reasons why you're learning this is it's important for real life or real world problems like finding the weight of your cell phone as a fraction instead of maybe as a decimal. So every day when we're taking notes, you should be filling in the blank areas, if there are blank areas. So our focus today is converting between decimals, fractions, and percents. In other words, we're converting between rational numbers and percents. So a little bit of background knowledge of something you may have learned in the 5th or the 6th grade. I've divided a rectangle evenly into 5 equal parts. That rectangle is in your notes. And if I have one part of that rectangle shaded, what is that as a fraction? Any idea? Yes? It's 1/5. Okay? So if you shaded just this area right here, obviously 1/5 of it is shaded. And if I were to then think of that as a decimal, anybody know what that is as a decimal, just off the top of your head?
0.2.
It's 0.2, right. Good. And what would that be as a percent? So 0.2 or 2/10 of that is shaded if one part is shaded. But what is that as a percent? Yeah.
20%.
It's 20%. Good. And this is just stuff that you should have learned last year or perhaps the year before. If I shade in 3 parts of that rectangle, in other words, that one and that one and that one, as a fraction, that of course is 3/5. What is that as a decimal?
0.6.
0.6. And what is that as a percent?
60%.
60%. And these are all values that are equivalent to each other. 60% is equivalent to 0.6, which is also equivalent to 3/5. So that's, when I say background knowledge, we're talking about something that you learned or you should have learned in the past. So also in previous grades, you may have represented as the decimal value 0.27 like this. That should not seem like something you haven't seen before. 27 out of the 100 squares are shaded. Okay? And that also means that 27% of the squares are shaded. And all of those values right there, 0.27, 27 over 100, and 27%, these are, once again, what we would term as equivalent numbers or equivalent representations of the same value. They all represent the same thing. And I noticed this morning that the second one, there was actually a mistake in the second shaded picture that you have there. Could anybody see what's wrong with the second shaded picture? Yeah.
There needs to be one more full box.
Yeah. And so I fixed it in the lesson, so I'm going to have you actually fix it in your notes. Notice that there are 32 and 1/3 in the representation for 1/3. So 1/3 should actually look like that. So I actually shaded an extra one in there right here that wasn't there because now it's 33 1/3. Now why did it have to be 33 1/3? Well, because that's 33 1/3% is an equivalent representation of 1/3. So make sure that you shade in an extra square there. So 33 1/3 out of the 100 squares are shaded. 33 1/3% of the squares are shaded. And of course, these are all representations of the same value. 1/3 can be represented as 33 1/3 out of 100 or 33 1/3 over 100, and that can also be represented as 33 1/3%. Now these are all things you should have talked about, hopefully, in the past. So once again, this is all background knowledge, things you should have talked about or seen in the past. Maybe last year, maybe the year before that, but you should have seen things like this before. So these are all equivalent representations of the same value. So let's deal with a little bit of vocabulary for today. First of all, rational number. And this is where you need to fill in the definition. A rational number can be defined as any number that can be written as a fraction. And I'm going to give you some examples because there are lots of different numbers that we can write as a fraction. For example, 0.6 is a rational number because we can write that as a fraction. If we thought about how to say that, that's 6/10. That comes from 5th grade. And 6/10 simplifies to 3/5. So that's the reason why 0.6 is a rational number. It can be written as a fraction. -5 can be written as a fraction. That's a rational number. -5 over 1. See, I've written it as a fraction, therefore it's a rational number. And yes, you should be writing down these examples. 2/3 is a rational number. It's already written as a fraction. 75% is a rational number. By the way, how do you write 75% as a fraction?
3/4.
It's 3/4. 75 over 100, which simplifies to 3/4. Okay, next, percent can be defined as something that represents per 100. All right, now that we've dealt with our background knowledge and we've defined everything that we really need to define, let's deal with some examples. So if we have decimal value of 0.63 as a fraction, that's 63/100. And right now you can just start filling in blank areas. I'll have you try some problems in just a second. And as a percent, that's 63%. Those are all equivalent representations of the same number. 0.63, we read that as 63/100, which is why the fractional value is 63 over 100. And since percent means per 100, 63 over 100 is the same thing as 63%. And one way you may have been taught in the past is to go from a decimal to a percent is to move the decimal 2 times because you're really multiplying it by 100. All right, if you have 29% and you want to write that as a fraction and a decimal, well, as a fraction, that's 29 over 100 because remember, percent means per 100. As a decimal value, you may have been taught in the past to move from or to change from a percent to a decimal, you move the decimal 2 places to the left. That's one easy way of remembering. I prefer to think of it as dividing it by 100. Now, every year there are 1 or 2 people who can't remember moving left or right. Here's an easy way of remembering. Think about alphabetical order. Decimal starts with the letter D, percent starts with the letter P. To go from D to P in the alphabet, you move to the right. So to go from a decimal to a percent, you move to the right. And of course, the opposite is true when you go from P to D in the alphabet or a percent to a decimal. So that's just kind of a little thing for you to remember if you can't remember whether you're moving left or right. All right, continuing on here, 0.07 as a fraction is 7 over 100. And as a percent, that, of course, is 7%. Lots of ways of getting there. And then the last example here is 1.8%. That is 1.8 over 100. Percent means per 100. But a better way of looking at that is 18 over 1,000. Now I got to 18 over 1,000 by multiplying top and bottom by 10. We don't like to have a fraction with a decimal involved in there. That's why I converted it. And then as a decimal, that is 0.018. Okay, so now we're going to do a little bit of practicing. But before we do that, I want to make sure everybody remembers how to convert from a fraction to a decimal. So if you have forgotten how to do that, here is how you do that. If we start with 3/8, and I know that this one is not in your notes, this is just a reminder of what to do. That means 3 divided by 8. And when you are figuring out 3 divided by 8, you set it up as a division problem. Why did I put 0.00 beyond the 3? Because I'm probably going to need a decimal and some zeros. So then we just start dividing. 8 does not go into 3, but it does go into 33 times. That's 24. We subtract, bring down a 0. And 8 goes into 67 times. That's 56. We subtract. That's 4. And we bring down another 0. And we just keep dividing until it either stops, which is called terminating, or it repeats. And you can see right now it is going to stop or terminate, and that would be 0.375. Now to go from a decimal to a fraction, you think about how you read it. 0.375 is 375 thousandths. So we start there and then reduce it or simplify it, and that's how we get back to 3/8. Okay? All right, let's go to our table. And as a percent, that, of course, would be 37.5%. And the thing that I need to make sure of is everybody remembers it's top number divided by bottom number, not bigger number divided by smaller number. Every year there are 1 or 2 people who think that's what it is because they think that's what they were taught. That's not the case. It's top number divided by bottom number. All right, now the table. Everybody convert 7/8 to a decimal and a percent. All right, so 7 divided by 8 gives us a value of 0.875. We keep dividing until it either terminates or repeats. This is a terminating decimal. We'll get to repeating decimals a little bit later in this lesson, but it is 0.875, and as a percent, it of course is 87.5%. You can either multiply it by 100 or move the decimal 2 times, but that's what it should be. All right, everybody try. Number 2, 61%. Write that as a decimal and a fraction, and this one should take about 5 seconds, if that. What's the decimal? Yep.
Decimal for 2 is
0.61. Thank you for putting the 0 in front of it. There needs to be a number in the ones place just to make sure. And then, of course, as a fraction,
61 over 100.
there we go, 61 over 100. All right, let's continue on here. In fact, I would like everybody to go ahead and do 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Go ahead and do all 5 of those. So you just shoulder partner all of your answers. I heard lots of good answers there, so let's go through these quickly. If you made any mistakes, let's fix them now. 4/5 is equivalent to 0.8, which is equivalent to 80%. Number 4, we started with 16%. That is equivalent to 0.16 as a decimal, and it starts as 16 over 100, but we always simplify fractions. That simplifies to 4 over 25. Number 5 starts as 0.009 as a decimal. That is, as a fraction, 9 over 1,000. Because that's how we would read that, 9 thousandths. That comes from either 4th or 5th grade. And then as a percent, that would be 0.9%, or 9/10 of a percent. Number 6 is 3/10. That was an easy one. That's 0.3, and then also 30%. And then number 7, we start with 270%. What is that as a decimal? Yes?
2.7.
2.7. What is that as a fraction, or in this case, a mixed number? Yeah. 2 and 7/10. Good. If you think about 2.7, that's how you read it, or that's how you're supposed to read it. 2 and 7/10. All right. Any questions so far? All right. So far we've dealt with terminating decimals. But what happens if you have repeating decimals? Well, the idea is exactly the same. It's just that we would write our answers slightly differently. So here's a reminder on how you would deal with repeating decimals. So let's pretend, and this one I know is not in your notes, but just look up here. We start with 1/6. So to convert that to a decimal, we still have to do top number divided by bottom number. We just keep dividing until it either terminates or it repeats. And you can quickly see in this one that it's going to terminate, or excuse me, it's going to repeat. Because we have repeating 6s. Okay? So now the question is, how do you write that as a decimal? Any ideas?
0.16 is the line.
Yeah, you use a repeating bar. So since only a 6 is repeating, there is a repeating bar over only the 6. Now the next question is, how do you write that as a percent? Well, if you think about what that really means, it really means 0.16666, and the 6's just keep going. So if I wrote out several of those 6's and then converted from a decimal to a percent like I normally would, I would move the decimal twice or multiply it by 100. Well, that gives me 16 point and then repeating 6's now. So that's how you would write that as a percent. We'll later find out that that's really 16 2/3%. But for right now, this is good enough. So this is how we convert from a fraction to a repeating decimal and then the corresponding percent for that. I would like you to go ahead and finish 8, 9, 10, and 11. And I'm going to leave this one up here just to make sure we're all clear on how we're supposed to deal with that. But go ahead and do 8, 9, 10, and 11, and I'll come back to you in a couple minutes. All right, so we are supposed to convert 8/9 to a decimal and a percent. Those would be equivalent representations of 8/9. When you divide that out, you're going to get 0.8 repeating, and that's 88.888888 as a decimal. And of course, we then move the decimal twice or multiply by 100, and it's going to give us 88.8 with a bar over the 8%. Number 9 was 5/6. Top number divided by bottom number gives us 0.83 with a bar only over the 3 because it is only the 3 that is repeating. That means 0.833333333, and then we either multiply by 100 or move the decimal twice, and you can clearly see that that will then be 83.3 repeating percent. Any questions on those two? Okay. 4 3/5, that should have been an easy one. That's 4.6. which then is in turn 460%. And the number 11 was 5/9, that's 0.5 with a bar over the 5, and then that means 55.555555555 and so on. And as a percent, that would be 55.5 with a bar over the 5%. Any questions before our last thing? All right, now we end most lessons with this question. And the question is this: what did you learn today? So you're going to turn to your shoulder partner and in 30 seconds have a quick little discussion on what you did today, what you learned today. Because if you don't know what we did, we've got big problems. Okay? Turn to your shoulder partner. 30 seconds.